Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Reasonable Doubt. I'm your host, Jimmy Ardoin. We are brought to you each week by the Harris County Criminal Lawyers Association. We'll be with you for the next hour. We have the Democratic candidate for Harris County District Attorney, Kim Ogg, with us for the next hour. So we appreciate Kim joining us. We're going to go through a lot of different topics about the election, a lot of criminal justice topics that have been in the news, and some that you might not have seen in the news, ladies and gentlemen. And as always, we will be taking your phone calls starting around 8:30. We also have Twitter up at HCCLA_TV, so you can send us your tweets, your questions and comments right here live on the air, and we'll get them for Kim Ogg. As always, the man across the table from me, Julio Vela. He is my co-host, my co-captain. How are you, Julio?
Good. Blessed, not stressed, Jimmy. Blessed, not stressed.
We've had a good run here now that we've come back from our little respite. We had a great show last week. We got another great show this week, and we got to keep it going now. So, you been up to anything fun?
Well, besides defending justice, taking down the government, walking into the courtroom like we own it, just the same old use. Same old good stuff. I'm telling you, I'm very excited about the show today.
I know.
Very excited.
I am too. And let's get right to it. Let's welcome Kim Ogg to the program. Kim, we thank you for joining us tonight.
It's my pleasure.
Appreciate you taking the time to join us on our little program and our little niche of the TV world. First off, before we get into all the issues, I want to know why you decided to run for district attorney.
Well, I've been a lawyer for 30 years. I've been primarily practicing in the field of criminal law, although I worked for one of our mayors, Bob Lanier, and I ran a nonprofit, Crime Stoppers. But I love the practice of law. And the chief criminal prosecutor in the city could, if this job were handled right, make people safer. I think we could improve race relations. I think we could improve the practice of law and people's trust in the justice system. And I want to be part of that. I want to lead the effort from the prosecution side to both make streets safer and restore people's sense of fairness, what they think is right, that's happening down in our courts. And right now, people think the system's broken. And they all agree, different walks of life, different races, different ages. The people who call my office or come up to me after a talk, since I've been running really the last 3 years, they're dissatisfied, to say the least. They think it's rigged or unfair. They think there's a double standard. And that is what the evidence shows. So I want to change that. I want to reform criminal justice. I want to make the streets safer.
Well, and you're a practicing lawyer now. And as DA, you probably won't get to practice law too much, except the occasional case where the DA maybe comes down to try a capital case or something like that. Are you ready to embrace, after being a practicing lawyer for so long, more of the role of an administrator and a policymaker?
Great question. Casework is so fun because you see the result. It's instant gratification after a few years. Obviously, it's not instant, but you know how the story ends. Public policy work is so different because you're affecting hundreds of thousands of people, even millions here in Harris County, and you don't know how your work is going to play out. But I know that we have such unfair policies right now, we have such injustice in our system, that almost anything is going to be a welcome relief to people. I want them to know that there's an option, that we don't have to have heavy-handed prosecutors that put witnesses, rape victims in jail, that they can report their crimes, that we'll do our job, and that we'll do it in an unbiased way. So I think that policy work gives you the opportunity to impact so many more people, but you never really get the gratification. Maybe years later, somebody comes up, this happened at the mayor's anti-gang office, hey, you know, you really changed my life, or that policy in our school really kept me safe. So good things happen, but you hear about it intermittently. Mostly if you're an elected official, I think you hear about the problems. And I'm excited about tackling criminal justice problems. We've seen no leadership. We've had such a void in this area, you know, and we've got a very strong law enforcement set of unions. We've got crime victims. We've got lawyers, but the average person doesn't really know what the DA does, doesn't understand our court system, and boy, they're in for a rude awakening when they're victimized or when they get arrested or when it happens to their family member.
How do you come
We've
in?
got a lot to fix.
Yeah, we do.
We do.
We knew Miss Anderson came in and really took the reins of the district attorney's office. If you are elected, do you think you can come into one of the larger district attorney's offices in the country and really grab a hold of the reins and take control of that office? And what are some of your ideas on how you expect to achieve that?
Well, taking control is really not the way I like to lead. I enjoy a team approach. I want us to have clear values. I want the lawyers to be accepting of those values and have a mindset that's in line with them. And I think we'll use transition teams to see how the employees feel that are there now. And we'll look for people who are going to adopt the same or have the same set of values. It's clear we need some middle management, experienced lawyers in there. So I think we're going to be looking specifically for that. But how do you change the culture of prosecution?
Right, I think that's what it comes down to.
You do it through a successful prosecution. We're going to have to establish clear rules, train them on those rules, and give them discretion. We need to let lawyers be lawyers. This is, in effect, the DA's office of Harris County is the third largest public law firm in the country, in effect, handling just criminal law, and yet no case management system. The same timesheets we had when I started in 1987, only they've been computerized. So much in the world has changed, and so little of the processes at the Harris County DA's offices have changed. And so they're behind the times. And I think we need to professionalize the office through, we're gonna definitely need some better technology. We're gonna need a case management system, but we need it to work like a public law firm, not a governmental monolith. I'm going to be accountable. If I win, I'm accountable to the voters, and all of our employees will be accountable to voters as well. And I think what's been missing, in part, is just service. Victims, witnesses, and the accused. Prosecutor has duties to all of these people. You know, as a defense lawyer, it's great because I've only got to be responsible for zealously representing my client.
You got one person you're
Don't need to worry
responsible
about the
for.
witnesses, don't need to worry about the victim, don't need to worry about the prosecutor, the judge. Our duty is highly targeted. But a prosecutor's job to see that justice is done, it's a different concept for people. And I think what they must believe from television and certainly from the actions of this DA is that DAs are supposed to win their cases, that they're supposed to convict people and send them to prison. And that's just not always what justice looks like.
Yeah, you mentioned a little while ago the jailing of the rape victim. Yeah. Obviously, that has been the big story that's you know, permeated the news here, and obviously it's horrific. I went on last week's program. You know, I thought that the prosecutor who did it should have been suspended pending this investigation. I don't think there's any excuse for not suspending a prosecutor, regardless of feeling that they've done. I feel there's no reason in this situation. Suspend him with pay. But the real troubling thing about this, to me, was just a clear lack of oversight, in my opinion.
It's just bad judgment. That's what you said last week. I watched your show.
I mean, when is it ever proper to even consider putting in jail, let's start with a rape victim, but just any material witness?
Well, there is a third material witness. We found out now, based on our open records, and you saw the district attorney come out and confess that there was another rape victim in jail, and there was a third person, a witness in a capital murder, who they described as homeless. And I think that you'll be seeing some more information on that in the news in the very near future. And all I can say is that while the tool, a material witness bond, writ of attachment, has been on the books all the years I've been a lawyer and all the years you guys have been a lawyer, even prosecuting gang cases, I never had to use it.
Yeah.
You know, I might have talked about it, but we maintained relationships with the witnesses. We got to know their families. Literally, if you're preparing for a case and you talk to a guy in a serious case or a gal several times, you're going to develop a rapport. And, you know, in Jenny's case, she wasn't homeless. That's been a misrepresentation. I don't think these other people may have been homeless. And so we've got prosecutors using an extreme tool, relief that I've never asked a court for and didn't know any peers that had done so. So I don't know about you, but when the news came out, I was shocked.
I was
I
stunned.
mean, I was shocked.
Well, I was stunned because I know the reporter who broke the news, and he called me before he actually ran the story to say, you know, kind of to verify, like, have you ever heard anything like this going on? And I'm just like, no, that just sounds insane to me.
So now we find out it's a pattern and practice.
Well,
and
but-
so you asked me about
Yeah.
policy. So bad policy can hurt a lot of people, more even sometimes than bad law. Policy really runs the show, especially in the place of employment. And so this is clearly bad policy. So how important is good policy? It's very important. It's important to doing the job of district attorney or any elected position of leadership.
At the highest level of local and county enforcement, what are the things that you would have done different in this type of situation?
I would have put first of all, we could have asked the MHMR group down at St. Joseph's to hold her longer. The head of an agency can call the head of an agency. There can be an MOU so that you have a standing policy if this kind of situation comes up, that you would ask the mental health system to keep her in a sense in protective custody. We could have put her in a hotel.
One of the
We
biggest
could have left her with her family. We could have postponed the trial. Rape has no statute of limitations. We could have tried the other victim's case. We could have relied on scientific evidence. We could have done many other things to make the community safe and not destroyed a young woman in the process. I just, you know, lawyers like doctors do no harm first.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I'm going to take up for Devon a little bit because I do believe her when she says that she never wants to see anybody go through something like this, and this was never part of what, in her mind, you know, how you treat a victim. I do believe her on that. The thing is, and I want to know how this could be corrected in your office or how you would suggest correcting it, because I view the problem as something that never got to her desk until it was too late.
Well, that's an assumption, and I think until she gives her deposition,
I agree.
but in that civil rights case, we're not going to know. But she got on television and said key personnel made the decision. They can't dismiss a DWI without permission. They can't dismiss a criminal trespass. I've had those cases. Couldn't dismiss it without running the dismissal up the chain. My client had come back to court several times. I mean, we know how little discretion. So you know the chain of command,
Yes.
Jimmy. So it went to, this is the number two prosecutor. It went to the chief.
Right.
It went to the division chief. It went to the trial bureau chief. Now, some of the folks in these prominent and important administrative positions, Goodhart, others, you know, their name, this isn't the first time it's come up. We've seen them in other prosecutorial misconduct cases. We've seen judgment that is not just questionable, but unethical. And so how far did it go? When did she know? She hasn't told us.
She hasn't.
She hasn't told us. So, you know, until the evidence is in, I think it's an unknown. But there are at least 3 of these cases. I find it very disturbing. I would not allow such relief to be asked from a court without some kind of approval. But let me say, I want our lawyers to have discretion. I want assistant DAs to be real lawyers, be able to, if they take a case, they ought to be able to plead a case. If they're going to try it, they ought to be able to plead it or dismiss it. I don't want lawyers having to do the wrong thing because they think they're going to lose their job.
Do you view that
That's not the practice of law.
And you had talked about, I think one of your plans, and I know we've got a lot of things to get to tonight that I want to get to with you, but I know that one of your plans, since we kind of brought this up about the discretion, is you want to reorganize the office into more divisions. And I think the goal of that is to have prosecutors stay with cases longer, where you're not having this constant turnover of prosecutors.
The goal is effectiveness in prosecution, making good cases that where we know we have the right defendant and sufficient evidence that's admissible, and that we are doing justice by prosecuting that person. And I want not just the effectiveness increased, I want the efficiency increased. So vertical prosecution can be more efficient than horizontal prosecution. Horizontal prosecution, y'all know, is what we have now. It comes into intake, it moves down the assembly line, it goes to the court. They may send it to a special division but not the first setting, it's several settings. And each setting, of course, our clients are coming to court, they're missing jobs, they're paying us. We're racking up expenses, not just for the accused, but the court personnel and the prosecution. With vertical prosecution, we would specialize the office into more divisions, a gang division, a sex crimes division, and they would be robust: animal welfare, environmental prosecution, or environmental crime, a much larger white-collar division. These would be areas of practice specialty where we would let lawyers, we might hire them in directly to that division, or if they promoted to it, they would be able to stay and develop that particular expertise. And that's important, I found, when prosecuting gang crimes. When they went to random courts, there wasn't the same investment. The prosecutor didn't know the players, maybe didn't know the impact that gang had on the community. White-collar crime, you know, you're dealing with businesses where one embezzler could put 20 people out of work at a small business. And so I just find that when they rotate the prosecutors, and certain assignments, of course, are not real pathways for promotion. For example, white collar. I've never seen that used in 30 years as a real path to promotion, and those are important cases.
I've never really seen it used a whole lot in the office. I mean,
Do you
Right.
think?
I've handled a few this year, but it's
absolutely right.
It's a very limited office.
Prosecution's been privatized. They tell clients, they tell our clients, which is good for civil lawyers, this is a civil matter and you're going to have to go basically pay to prosecute this case privately. That's wrong. That's not service to the constituent. The business community pays taxes. They're people. They get ripped off. It hurts them. That is a crime that we should prioritize. So the way it'll work is cases will come into intake. That division will be professionalized. We'll have full-time prosecutors there. We'll have experienced lawyers there that I trust. That's where most of the problems, I think, are occurring. And the cases will go to their specialty divisions and their prosecutors for intake right there.
Do you think
So
that,
we'll have the same prosecutors taking in the cases in those specialty areas who then prosecute them.
do you think you got enough prosecutors in that office to divvy up and specialize?
I do. We're going to have fewer general prosecutors in the courts because we're going to have fewer cases. And overall, we need to reduce 120,000 cases a year. Do we need to convict that many people? When almost half of them are, you know, tiny amounts of crack or marijuana. 12,000 marijuana cases a year on average. Do we need to do that? I don't think we do. I want to keep those folks in. I want to keep them working.
So a lot of people want to know, are you going to prosecute trace cases? This administration, you know, the Likas administration did not prosecute them. Devon Anderson's administration has picked it back, well, starting with Mike Anderson's.
Right.
And she's continued it. They've picked back up trace cases and said, that's the law, we're going to follow it, we're going to prosecute them. What's your position on trace cases?
My position is if there's enough evidence for the prosecution, the defense, and the prosecution to test, then we'll prosecute. If there's not enough to test, and if we don't know if there's enough to test, then we should agree to a bond, a pretrial bond, until the testing is complete, unless the person, there's some extenuating circumstances that show that person would really be a threat to the community. But trace cases need to be handled, you know, I think that will knock out a large number of the trace cases. I don't think there's sufficient quantity of drugs in most of those cases to allow the defense adequate testing. And so you got a due process violation. This is not, you know, I was called dangerous when I ran last time on this same platform, dangerous. Well, this is really common sense. The public who sits on these juries, you guys know, they think it's absurd that we're spending their tax dollars to prosecute somebody for an empty crack pipe. And I agree with them. So it's a bit of a mixed bag with me. The answer is no if we can't test it. If we don't know, we'll agree to a bond, except in extenuating circumstances. And if it comes back positive, I think we can do a lot of pretrial diversion. I don't think it should be limited just to first-time offenders.
On the
We could do community service as well.
what are your thoughts on, speaking of low-level drug crimes, what are your thoughts on cite and release kind of deal, or a citation or a summons to come to court? Is that something that's even in the ballpark or universe of the Kimog administration?
Yes. So Austin PD has been doing it successfully with Travis County District Attorney's Office for, I think, 8 years now. Cite and release, which is really summons, just giving somebody a summons.
Just like a traffic ticket.
Right. We just skip jail and we save millions. And we do this in Class A and B cases. Maybe not all. Maybe we don't do it in domestic violence. Maybe we don't do it in theft cases. But trespass, criminal mischief, we're not going to prosecute misdemeanor marijuana. That's probably the position that I've taken that is the most progressive, and that's even been done in Brooklyn. So I think we can save millions on the jail, and you know, right now our jail kills people. We have a jail that has become notorious for neglect and abuse and losing human beings.
And the fact that you would consider putting a material witness and a rape victim in there is stunning to me.
How do you,
with that?
I won't do that.
Yeah.
And it was easy to offer the public the option and say, you have a candidate who will never jail a crime victim to secure a conviction. Crime victims are defined in the law, by the way. They are basically the victims of kidnap, robbery, rape, murder. So crime victim is much more narrowly defined in our law than you hear it used at the courthouse. And so when I hear Devon say she's a champion of crime victims, that's been my topic area for 30 years. Largely in part, I think, because my mom was a kidnap victim when I was a child, and you know, that had some effect on our family, a lot of effect. She didn't talk about it publicly, but she certainly carried the scars from it. And so our background and experience shapes us. I'm empathetic to people who are brave enough to come forward. I was not a crime victim, thank goodness, but the men and women who are victims of sexual assault really need a system that they can trust and believe in. It's an important crime, and I've represented young men and a woman charged with sexual assault. They deserve good representation. We can't make these accusations lightly. We need to give the defense, I think, an opportunity to offer an explanation. So, for example, in these teacher cases, sexual assaults, they run out and pick up the teachers and do a perp walk right there at the school. I don't think that's good for our city. It's certainly not good for the students in that school, much less the victim.
well, all of this
So we ought to wait and see how the evidence plays out before we directly take those charges, unless there's extenuating circumstances. You catch somebody in the act, great. Let's try to jack up his bond.
What makes you think that you can maybe mend or create new bridges with the sheriff's office and the police departments out there going on? What are things that you're going to do different? Because some would say that the relationship between the district attorney's office and the sheriff's office and other police agencies should be one that's symbiotic, that works together. However, some might argue that that's not the case now. What makes you think that you can fix that, or do you even think that it's something that should be fixed?
Well, yes, I think we want to have, between our leaders in criminal justice, we need communication. I mean, this is a huge county. People need to be able to work with each other. We have to make an effort in the DA's office to work with the sheriff, the police chief, the mayor, and all of the constables and other police chiefs that make up, 60 law enforcement agencies? But symbiotic relationship, no.
Okay.
They are witnesses. They are independent agencies. We're lawyers. We have a different job. Their job is to protect and serve, make the streets safe. And I think the DA should and can embrace the concept of making the streets safe, but not by going out literally and policing, but by organizing the office in a way that protects people not just from violent crime, but from serious theft and embezzlement, fraud, property crimes, that brings law enforcement together for planning sessions so that when they are conducting their criminal investigations, the district attorney can provide support in the form of advice, counsel, warrants, liaisoning with attorneys, private attorneys for targets and witnesses. And so, symbiotic, no. A healthy working relationship, yes. But I've seen too many conflicts of interest be swept under the carpet by the Anderson administration. And I see that friends of this district attorney and friends of her top administrators and law enforcement, that there are many conflicts of interest that don't seem to get disclosed, are portrayed as minor when really they're major relationships. And we see people not be prosecuted as a result. People who, if we committed those acts or our clients committed those acts, you know, they'd be under the jail. So I really don't like the double standard that I see going on. I think that conflict of interest is something, especially as more prosecutors and police have created families. They date, they're married. We've got judges who are married to each other. We've got prosecutors married to judges and police officers. So with these relationships, and here we are in close quarters with the accused, with the victims, with the defense bar, we need to be disclosing those conflicts of interest. At a private law firm, it's the first thing we do.
Exactly.
We run around a conflict of interest sheet, see if everybody's cool, and if they're not, then we have an ethical obligation not to take that case. So our DAs need to run a quick conflict check. We need a policy on that. You know, Shell, Exxon, companies have these policies, they're routine. So our government, this Harris County government is just way behind the times, not just when it comes to employment rights and duties, but just the simple administration of a modern law firm is not getting done.
Well, you talked about a little bit earlier about how you would use diversion tactics to allow not just first-time offenders, but second, I don't know, maybe third, in drug cases.
Yes.
And so it's a two-part question. One, what are your personal feelings about prosecuting people who just prosecuting users, period? And two, based on your feeling of that, would you feel comfortable making some sort of legislative recommendation to the state, to state legislators on changing those laws?
So that was like 3 questions, Jimmy.
Sorry.
That was so compound.
I know.
That
And
was
it would
so
draw an
compound.
objection and probably be sustained.
So, as you know, small-time drug cases make up, about 40% of the daily court docket. I think our prosecutors in Harris County should have the discretion to use pretrial diversion when they think it's appropriate in individual cases, which means wide open discretion. Now, does that mean, you give it to your friends but not your enemies? No. I want our prosecutors to be treating people equally, declaring any conflicts they might have, letting another prosecutor handle it when they've got a conflict. And that conflict may be I'm too close to you. Or that conflict could be you've filed a grievance against me and I just probably can't be fair to you. So I think that conflict issue is really important, even in drug cases, because we have so many of them. Now, how would we handle pretrial diversion? There's so many ways. I really like public-private partnerships. When I was running the Mayor's Anti-Gang Task Force, we identified every social service agency in the city that did prevention or intervention with gang members. And we weeded out pretty quick the ones who were just looking for money and would say they handled gang members and then call me up, this guy's dangerous. Well, yeah, that's why we sent him to you. So identifying your resources, which evidently they don't even know who the mental health providers are in this city, or had no relationship to pick up the phone and call, in Jenny's case, to keep her a few extra days in a psychiatric facility. She was doing well. So I think we identify those service providers and we work partnerships with them, and we can assign people either as a condition of probation or pretrial diversion or deferred adjudication into some community service programs, things where they can really come out and rebuild our community. And I don't know why we can't do it in more cases. It is true we don't want to overburden probation so that they have unmanageable caseloads, unless I'm going to go advocate for more money.
Okay, but why do you need to have them supervised for probation if they're on diversion?
You don't. You do not. You do not.
I mean, why can't you go to probation? I mean, isn't it really a function of the DA's office? You're entering a contract. There's no requirement that it stay on the court's docket for a year.
No, those are all discretionary calls. As you know, the district attorney has an enormous amount of discretionary power and authority, and it's simply not used. What you hear Ms. Anderson say over and over is, that's the way we've always done it. And that is true, at least for these last 30 years. But I would say usually the phrase, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, applies, but I think our system's kind of broke. It is so broke.
Yeah, it is. And hold your thought, Julio, because I want to remind everybody we've reached the halfway point of the show. We're going to open up the phone lines. 713-574, I mean, what am I talking about? 713-807-1794. I'm trying to give out wrong numbers tonight. Give us a call right here. Send us your questions and comments also on Twitter at HCCLA_TV. We got a little question coming in from a viewer. So hold your question, Julio, because I want to get to this viewer's question. And it talks about, since we've been talking about the rape case that's been going around, it has to do with the legislation that Devon has been proposing to help rape victims. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that she needs to, if she's going to seek legislation, it needs to say something like, help keep Devon Anderson from abusing crime victims by using a draconian measure that no other prosecutors need around the state or the country. So I don't think we need legislation. That seemed like a red herring. She's had a lot of press conferences in the last few days, and she has revealed in those press conferences not just her judgment, but I think a real lack of common sense in just how to prosecute and administrate a large office handling sensitive matters.
What did you think about her response?
I thought it was angry and unfortunate for the victim. If their family saw that, it compounded the insult and injury. I think it was very unempathetic, and I think it is disingenuous to say you're against the jailing of rape victims and do that. And we find that it is a practice. There are 3 people at least in jail, 2 for rape, who are the victims, and 1 who's simply a witness to a capital murder. This is wrong. And they moved to get them out. The minute they found them, the DA moved to get them out. So it just smacks of very heavy-handed type of authority, and some of the folks in Ms. Anderson's administration are responsible. I want to know who. You said put them on leave. I want to know who they are.
Yeah, I think we have a copy of this video. Do we have that ready to go? Is this the video?
The Channel 2 news story and reviewing the lawsuit that was filed, I feel compelled to respond, despite the objections from my general counsel. Rarely, if ever, does this office comment on a matter that is in litigation. However, in this instance, this issue is much too important for me to remain silent. This report is disturbing, but there is more to the story that you were not told. First of all, I want everyone to know that this office will always put victims first, and seeking justice for crime victims is what this office is all about. This situation compelled key personnel in the Harris County criminal justice system to answer an extraordinarily difficult question. How were we to ensure that a homeless, mentally ill victim of an aggravated sexual assault would return to testify at the trial of her rapist when that victim was going through a life-threatening mental health crisis and had expressed her intention not to testify? If nothing was done to prevent the victim from leaving Harris County in the middle of trial, a serial rapist would have gone free, and her life would have been at risk while homeless on the street. At the prosecutor's request, the victim was initially placed in a private psychiatric facility. Unfortunately, she was not allowed to remain there for more than 10 days and was discharged. The assistant district attorney presented a witness bond, and the trial judge, after careful consideration and personal observation of the victim while on the witness stand, granted the request. When the trial resumed in January, the victim was available to testify and did so, resulting in the conviction of the serial rapist and 2 life sentences without parole. This office has a long history of supporting victims of crime. To claim otherwise is outrageous. Texas law specifically authorizes either side to ask the court for a writ of attachment to ensure a witness's appearance at trial. We rarely do this, but when a case calls for it to be done, we are willing to make that hard decision. Our trial prosecutor was assisted by an investigator, 2 victim assistance coordinators, and a mental health specialist in working with this victim. I have carefully reviewed the case and fully support our prosecutor's actions. It bears repeating. This was an extraordinarily difficult and unusual situation. There were no apparent alternatives that would ensure both the victim's safety and her appearance at trial.
There's a disconnect between what's going on in her office and what's really happening out here.
I've thought that there's been a disconnect between the Harris County DA's office and the real life of people who are in our criminal justice system for some time now. I can't say when it started. I know that when I practiced there, I went to the same classes that the prosecutors who are running it now went to, and I came away with a very different sense of justice. And so I see a huge disconnect when they deal with our clients who are working, who are professional, and I get prosecutors who have no understanding that a conviction will put somebody out of work for X number of years, and they'll come back and say, well, that's our policy. And I often ask them, well, why do you have that policy? Why won't you offer, for example, deferred to a nurse? And most of the employees at the Harris County DA's office do not seem to know the answer to the straight up policy question, why? And the answer seems to be often, too often, well, I would lose my job if I go ask for something else, or, well, because that's what the chief or the division chief said. No advocacy on their part. And I have to believe that these are young, good lawyers who are being mistrained. I really think there's a lot of nice, qualified people, but they're not being given a clear directive, set of values. They're not being shown that by experienced leadership who's acting out good common sense judgment and lawyering. And they seem to be afraid of making decisions that will be criticized by others, afraid to the point that they'd rather not make the decision.
Well, the response now isn't, let me run it up the chain. That's usually the second or third response. The first response now, a lot of times, is becoming, yeah, you know, I don't think this is a good case. I think it should be dismissed, but I have to ask first. Now, ethically, you would think that that lawyer who's handling the case, prosecution or not, has a duty
That's right.
to ethically follow their own decisions as being a lawyer on this case for this person. And what we're seeing is that lawyer may be skirting their ethical duties as being a licensed attorney in the state of Texas for something
I
else.
want our lawyers to sign their name in a legible form on a nollie. I want a nollie to say not just see state's file. They have been trained to do things that make expunction more difficult for ordinary people. When the government has a case that they dismiss, I personally believe that we should pay for the expunction. It's not impossible to do. There's a process for it, and the DA can do it, and I'm going to start with misdemeanors. I think that we need to get off the backs of our citizens. They want to be protected. Everybody agrees. We don't want burglars in our houses. We don't want to be assaulted or, attacked when we're running to the store. We want our kids to be safe. Everybody wants the same things, but we also we don't want to be thrown in jail if we report somebody for sexual assault. We don't want to be arrested or have our mentally challenged relative, if we call the police for help, we don't want them killed. We want a reasonable response as people from our justice system, and that's what's lacking. So when you say, is there a disconnect? Yes. I don't believe that the responses of most of the lawyers in practice right now in the DA's office are individually determined. They just aren't allowed to make those decisions, and so the office cannot grow. I think we're going to need some experienced lawyers to move into the middle and lead from the front.
I want to kind of switch topics to the jail. There have been a number of incidents, you alluded to it earlier, about people dying while in the custody of the Harris County Jail. We had some incidents here the other day where a suspect had his head smashed in by deputies over there. We had the guy we talked about a few months ago who was stealing a guitar or something like that, and he dies in the Harris County Jail. So this is a repeating problem over and over again. You go in on a misdemeanor. The guy over there, this last incident that was reported on Channel 13, he went in for a DWI. I mean, these people are dying on misdemeanor cases.
Yeah, they're getting the death penalty simply because they've been arrested. It's so wrong.
Yeah,
and it's going to cost taxpayers zillions before it's over.
Well, and you talked about the methods of getting in there and getting people bonds or in lower bonds or pretrial bonds, pretrial release bonds. I wonder, and you know about the lawsuit that's going on that's declared the bail bond schedule illegal.
Unconstitutional, I think, is the claim. And,
and
I agree with them. I think it is unconstitutional.
So what power can changing the bond schedule or having prosecutors go in and advocate for personal recognizance bonds, can that help eliminate issues like people getting their heads smashed in on a misdemeanor DWI case?
Of course. Everybody that we divert around that jail is one less person that may slip and fall or get punched in the face or get forgotten in a cell. And I think that decreases our risk of injuring citizens. Government's not supposed to injure citizens. We're supposed to make them safe. So, yes, I think that can help. And I think that prosecutors, there's been a longstanding policy, this is true, all of my career, where prosecutors seem to believe there's policy that they can't agree to pretrial bonds. They should be able to agree based on the tool that's used by pretrial services, that if the person's low risk, that they don't object to a pretrial bond. Now, of course, there's no defense counsel there at a critical stage of representation. So nobody asked for it, and the accused certainly doesn't know. And so I'm for funding from Commissioner's Court to have a defense lawyer there at that critical stage. Taxpayers want to know that the people that are arrested and prosecuted and convicted are the right people, that their rights were not violated, and that they got just treatment and a just sentence. And I think they will then support when we ask them to send somebody to the penitentiary who's hurt a bunch of people out in our community or hurt somebody, they'll do it. They'll trust that that's fair. But if we're allowing them to die and minimizing, I see our leadership minimizing human life.
Yeah.
I think it's terrible. And so we want to, and Hickman does not have control of the jail. It's pretty clear. So Ed Gonzalez is on the ticket. He offers an alternative to the public. I encourage people to take a look at Ed's plan. It's sound. It's an option. He's compassionate and more interested in safety, not just out on our streets, but in the jail. So, I'm for Gonzalez.
We got a phone call I want to take right now. Let's drop it in here. Hello, welcome to Reasonable Doubt.
Oh, thank you for having me on the show.
Absolutely.
The question I had is the Harris County Jail, as you were just talking about, has been overcrowded for quite some time. Recently, like in the last 2 years, it was low enough and low capacity, but now again they've started shipping people out. So what other policies can the DA do to ensure that the Harris County Jail is not overcrowded?
Great question. Kim?
We can pay attention to the population, and we can control it at intake. We can also control it through pleas and processing people out. The district attorney has control of the front door of the jail and the back door of the jail. Most people think that's the sheriff or the chief of police. It's not. It's the DA. So how we behave in terms of opposing bonds or agreeing to bonds matters. We've got to control that population. We've got to control the total caseload by simply deprioritizing certain things that the public doesn't, that doesn't increase the danger out on the street. Marijuana is a good example. We can divert 12,000 people a year out of jail. We agree to more pretrial bonds, especially on these tiny dope cases. We encourage the police not to work so many tiny dope cases, but to work more burglaries for us instead, and we offer them the support to do that. People are happier. Our burglary prosecution rate goes from abysmal to respectable. People start having trust. They don't, you know, those are cases where you don't hear a lot about discrimination because nobody really cares what race a burglar is.
True.
How do you?
Or what gender a rapist is. Where you see the disparate treatment of minorities is primarily in drug cases. And that's part of why I want to end the prosecution of misdemeanor marijuana. We got to stop ruining the future of our kids. We got to keep people in the labor pool. We got to keep people working. That'll make a better economy. It'll be better quality of life, and it will improve race relations.
How do you, in the event that you are elected to office, how do you see yourself interacting with the defense bar? For example, we've had histories where the relationship between the defense bar is very antagonistic. We've had others where there's been olive branches extended. How do you see yourself interacting with the defense bar if you're elected?
I think that we will have a professional and collegial relationship. Our job as prosecutors is very different than your job as a criminal defense lawyer. I think that this us and them attitude must end. I think that criminal defense bar are professionals who deserve courtesy, effectiveness, efficiency. So we don't need to purposely make you work up a case, make your client spend the money when we know we're going to dismiss it the week before. Those kinds of unprofessional actions will stop. They'll stop because we'll train on it. We'll set clear guidelines. It doesn't mean roll over. It means go out and, fight for justice. But it's a different job than you. And now, with the Michael Morton Act, it's our job to make sure you have everything we have and that you have what you need to adequately defend your client. Otherwise, I come back and try that same case again and again. And that does the victim no good, and that doesn't increase public safety, but it does waste a lot of money, and it does shake people's faith in the justice system. So we're going to treat you like professional colleagues.
Speaking of shaking people's faith in the justice system, we got about 10 minutes left, and I want to be sure we get this in because this continues to be a problem. It is next to the jail. It's probably the biggest eyesore for the county, and that is the continuing problems with our crime lab. It is abysmal. It is an embarrassment that we keep having these problems come over and over and over again. And I want to know, will you demand a truly independent crime lab for Harris County?
Yes, and let me say, as the DA, I have no authority to make the mayor determine whether his crime lab should be, the Houston Police Department crime lab should be under the Houston Police Department or independent. I can't control Commissioner's Court, but as the lead criminal justice official, the job that I seek and that I'm interviewing for now, I'll tell you there's no more important evidence than scientific evidence. Our credibility as a justice system in large part rides on how we handle that scientific evidence. And so I will lead the charge for permanent, sufficient funding by an independent entity for testing of scientific evidence. And I proposed using drug forfeiture funds to wipe out the backlog that the Harris County lab fibbed about not having. I guess it's all in how you define backlog. But, more than 250 people waited more than 6 months for their rape kits to be tested. That's a backlog, and yet they denied it. So interestingly enough, my opponent, Ms. Anderson, came out in the paper against that policy. I thought that was interesting. She didn't want to use drug forfeiture funds for rape kits. She said that she was running the office, she was operating the office on those funds. Now that is weird, and that is new, and I don't see other offices or DAs around the country do that. She has pushed all of her $70 million budget, almost all of it, into salaries. And the operations, the paper clips, the pens, the computers, the copy machines, the Ozarka water, that's being paid for with drug forfeiture funds. And I'm really not interested in revenue-driven government budgets where we have to go out and find crime and arrest people to make our bottom line. That is bad government, it's poor planning, and I'm not going to engage in it. So I want to use the drug forfeiture funds for the things the legislature intended them for, to help people reintegrate into the community, to help our white-collar division beef up, to give the attention to the problems that the district attorney's not going to have traditional funding for. But paper clips and water aren't one of them. So even the way they're handling the money, I find terribly irresponsible, and it builds a bias into the system. It means they need forfeiture money to exist, and that is not seeking justice.
Right.
That's trying to pay for your budget.
We got another call coming in. I want to get in here. Hello, welcome to Reasonable Doubt. Thanks for your call.
Thank you for the opportunity. My issue is one that when a person is late to court, sometimes perhaps because of traffic, other times maybe because of the lines at the front of the building with the metal detectors. I've been in court a number of times with my son where at 9:01 the state says the state moves for bond forfeiture. However, perhaps my son gets there at 10 after 9 or sometimes maybe 20 after 9. His bond is in jeopardy. I'm not clear how the government agency is comfortable moving for a forfeiture of a bond within that short amount of time. I'll hang up to listen, and thank you.
Thanks, great question.
I think it shows the gotcha mentality that's the same win-at-all-cost culture that we started talking about. That's what's got to change. It's not that defendants who are late should be excused. That's really between the accused and the judge. That's what I tell my clients, tell them to go early, all of that. But before we put somebody in our Harris County jail, we really need to be thinking about whether that's the best thing for public safety. If we take him out of his job, we get his car impounded, he can't pick up his kids at school, his wife's gonna, there's a cascading effect in real people's lives. And that's where the disconnect comes in, I think, with this administration. We can seek justice and we can do less harm, and we will be safer as a result. We'll be safer. I think we create a lot of our own problems in this justice system. I think that's why people think it's broken. It doesn't make sense.
You know, one thing I have not heard you say all night long, which is the typical mantra of most prosecutors, is we got to be tough on crime. You haven't said that once.
So to me, this is how we become tough on crime. We get rid of the garbage cases. We focus on the things that hurt people, that our constituents want stopped: fraud, burglary, rape, murder. We encourage the other leaders in criminal justice to do the same, and I set standards for evidence that will encourage at intake the filing of the more serious cases, not the filing of the lesser cases. And we push the lesser cases off, the tiny drug cases, into diversionary punishment, type punishment, and we focus our resources on quelling the danger, stopping the the folks who hurt us most, and we find that in many different places. You said white-collar crime victims there are thousands out there who've had no justice, and a lot of them are mom-and-pop businesses, international community. Boy, they need that money, and when they lose it, it means jobs. It means it's bad for those families. So we can make ourselves safer by prioritizing crime, by using our taxpayer monies more wisely. Devon Anderson has jumped, her budget has jumped 22% in the time that she's been district attorney. Crime is up. They're filing still the same crummy little bitty drug cases. Burglary still basically unprosecuted. We have rape victims in jail, and our murder rate is up by 25%. This is not a good track record. I can beat this. We can do better, and I'm going to. And to me, we can be tough and smart on crime. Being tough these days in the 21st century is all about being smart.
When we look back at, let's say, the AUG years, what is it that you want to be remembered by?
You know, on our prosecutors' evaluations, there's one question. By the way, they've never changed them. It's the same evaluation.
We got about a minute left.
You got it. There's a sentence about, did the prosecutor seek justice? Were they fair? I want to be remembered for seeking real justice, for really being fair and even-handed, and for implementing good policies that actually make the public safer. I am here to interview for the job with the public and with my colleagues in the defense bar. I'm honored that you had me, and I really appreciate the time you gave me to lay out my vision of what our justice system can look like.
Absolutely. We appreciate you being on. We appreciate any candidate that wants to come on our show. I know we've invited several. Some have declined, some have accepted, so we may see some more on the show, but we always like to have candidates on here, right, Julio?
Yes, it's great. It's great show. I'm very excited. I'm very good show.
Hey,
Yeah.
when we really start to think about what it can look like and how well it could work, I mean, it would make the practice of law a lot funner down at the state courthouse, down at the Harris County. What are you doing at the courthouse? You know.
Exactly. That's all the time we have. That's all the time we have now, ladies and gentlemen. But we're going to see you next week. And like I said, we extend an invite to all the candidates, including Devon Anderson, to come on our show anytime you want. Give us a call. Hit us up at HCCLA_TV. We'll see you next week. For Julio, Vela, I'm Jimmy Ardoin. Good night, everybody.